The idea that Iran, the heir of ancient Persia, is linked to biblical prophecies about the future of the Middle East may seem intriguing, even controversial to many. After all, what does a modern country have to do with ancient texts written thousands of years ago? This is one of those topics that sparks curiosity and a bit of unease, especially when we look at the current tensions between Iran and Israel, echoing what's written in books like Daniel and Ezekiel. Some believe these prophecies are on the verge of fulfillment, while others see it all as a series of coincidences. But what if there's something deeper here? What if the destiny of the Middle East has already been written in the pages of the Bible, waiting to be revealed? In the world of Scripture, every detail matters. The prophets wrote about the roles of nations and leaders, describing alliances and wars, and Persia is right there, playing a role that seems tailor-made. When we look at historical figures like Cyrus the Great, we see that even the most powerful rulers from different cultures can be instruments in God's hands. And Iran, as the successor of that empire, still carries this aura of mystery and purpose, with prophecies pointing to an outcome that seems ever closer. Could we be on the brink of witnessing the fulfillment of something grand and ancient? In this study, we'll explore the connections between biblical prophecies and present-day Iran, observing how history and faith intersect in a story filled with suspense, revelations, and hope. Ready to understand how the past shapes the future and why the Middle East's fate may be closer to a climax than we imagine? The story of Persia and Israel isn't just any narrative. It's like a tapestry where their destinies intertwine with prophecy and purpose. From the pages of the Old Testament, Iran, then known as Persia, emerged as a key piece. And we're not just talking about territory or warfare, it goes deeper. Biblical prophecies indicate that this nation would play a crucial role in major events. Imagine how surprising it is to think that thousands of years ago, figures like Cyrus the Great were used to help restore Israel. Yes, restoration, because what seemed impossible to many became reality through a pagan empire, Persia, led by a king who likely had no idea of the grandeur of his prophetic role. And what's most impressive is how this was planned in advance. Prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah spoke of the Israelites' return to Jerusalem long before Cyrus was born. It's as if Israel's destiny had been entrusted to a foreign leader, showing the complexity and audacity of how God acts in history. For many, understanding the role of the Persians in the Bible may be like exploring a rare piece in a vast puzzle. And when we look at the current scenario, with Iran playing such a strong role in global relations, it's hard not to think that maybe this same role is still unfolding. After all, why does this relationship with Israel persist to this day? Another intriguing point is how Iran is mentioned in end-times prophecies, like in Ezekiel. The famous Battle of Gog and Magog, for example, where some interpretations point to the involvement of the Persians alongside other nations, seems like something out of an epic film, but we're talking about prophecies that have been in the scriptures for centuries. And the curious part? This same country, which we know today as Iran, remains enigmatic and controversial, still influencing decisions and remaining relevant on the global stage. It's not as if time has erased its role. On the contrary, it only intensifies, bringing with it a sense of anticipation. This view of a pagan nation being an instrument of God to fulfill His will over Israel challenges many ideas and surprises even the most seasoned scholars. For instance, have you ever considered the cultural and religious impact of all this? Cyrus wasn't an Israelite, but he was called anointed in Isaiah 45 verse 1. What a fascinating paradox! It's as if, without knowing, Cyrus was fulfilling a role written before he existed. Who, in our reality, could understand this idea? It's as if God were playing chess with time and history, moving unlikely pieces to win the game, a lesson that He works beyond what we can see and understand. Now, anyone who delves into the story can see that Iran's role in biblical prophecies goes far beyond simple function fulfillment. It's a powerful reminder that God uses whoever He wants, wherever He wants, and whenever He wants. And if you pay attention, you might see this in the small things in your life too, in those moments when help comes from where we least expect it. So, looking at the complexity of prophecies about Iran and the role of the Persians, there's more than just history. There's an invitation to the next question. How does this connect with the roots and genealogy of Persia itself in the Bible? The connection between Iran and the Bible begins long before any empire. It goes back to the lineage of Noah and his sons, particularly Japheth. The descendants of Japheth, including the Medes, would eventually found the mighty Persian Empire, which would have a crucial role in Israel's story. It seems intriguing, but think of it as an extensive family tree where the roots, instead of being in the ground, are in the pages of Scripture. This story reveals how even seemingly distant peoples and cultures were intertwined with Israel's destiny, forming a prophetic tapestry from the very beginning. It's as if, from Noah onward, there was a plan in place, where Iran, even unknowingly, positioned itself as an ally and, later, as an important actor in the end times. Many today might be surprised by the depth of this connection, but in ancient times, it wasn't uncommon for one nation to be linked to another not just by proximity, but by these genealogical and historical roots. In the books of Daniel and Ezekiel, the Persian ancestry, alongside the Medes, represents the union of two forces, fulfilling a greater purpose and participating in a divine plan. And here's what's curious. This ancestry didn't distance them from Israel. On the contrary, it seemed to bring them closer to the role of protectors and restorers, as we would see later with figures like Cyrus the Great. Who would have thought that such an ancient bond would still carry weight in future events? With these origins, Persian culture wasn't just a symbol of strength but also of wisdom, mystery, and connection with the sacred. Even today, if we observe, much of what is known about mysticism and the religion of the ancient Persian peoples impacts how modern Iran sees itself and acts on the global stage. This reflects even in its values and how the country responds to Israel. And there's the point. Far from being an ordinary nation, Persia, or Iran, retains an identity tied to ancient promises and achievements. The culture and history of the Medes and Persians remind us that every detail matters in a larger plan. And it's not only in biblical history that this connection is evident. In sacred texts, we see how the name and lineage of the Persians appear, with a role to fulfill. In the Old Testament, we don't see Iran as a mere supporting actor but as a force with a specific purpose, being used to influence Israel's destiny on various occasions. This shows that, from the beginning, the descendants of Japheth, particularly the Persians, were prepared to be part of this story. It's like looking at a painting that only reveals its contours and true image from afar. With this legacy, Iran enters the Old Testament stage as more than just a country with soldiers and kings. Its origin is intertwined with Israel's destiny in an almost prophetic way, a root that grows intertwined with future prophecies. And when we think of figures like Cyrus and Esther, this bond strengthens. When we talk about restoration in biblical terms, the name of Cyrus the Great is inevitable. Imagine a king who, though not Jewish, plays a central role in the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem and the return of Israel's people to their land. Prophets like Isaiah mentioned his name centuries before he was born, calling him God's anointed, a title almost exclusively for Israelite kings. It's as if Cyrus were predestined to be the liberator Israel needed at that moment. Fascinating, isn't it? After all, seeing a pagan figure being used so precisely to fulfill a biblical promise is one of the great ironies and wonders of sacred history. Cyrus not only allowed the exiles to return to Jerusalem but financed the rebuilding of the temple, a gesture that went beyond politics. It was a mark of reverence and respect for the Jewish people and their faith. This support wasn't common, especially for a ruler who controlled vast regions and could easily have ignored a smaller community. Yet, Cyrus insisted on respecting their beliefs and traditions, promoting peace and religious tolerance. His policy of respecting conquered cultures was, for the time, nothing less than revolutionary. Imagine modern leaders adopting this stance. The world would be a very different place, wouldn't it? Over the centuries, Cyrus has been remembered as a liberator, someone who did the unthinkable by giving the people of Israel what was rightfully theirs. This action carries significant symbolic and spiritual weight. It wasn't just the building of a structure or territory but the restoration of an identity, the return of a purpose. For many, Cyrus's actions reflect how destiny works mysteriously. It's a living example of how, sometimes, help comes from where we least expect it. And maybe it inspires us to look at our own lives, where solutions can come from unlikely sources, like that person who shows up at the right moment or an unexpected opportunity. And the impacts of this restoration go far beyond the temple. This initiative marked a new phase for the people of Israel, who could once again worship God in their land and rebuild their nation. This return and restoration strengthened the bond between God and Israel, showing that, regardless of time or circumstances, the divine plan remains unshakable. It's a lesson about hope and persistence, even for us today. In fact, we might even think of Cyrus as a symbol of the resilience and perseverance of the Jewish people themselves. But what remains from all this is that Cyrus was an instrument, an example that the divine will can manifest in unexpected ways, and that those chosen for certain roles may not be the ones we expect. Just as Cyrus fulfilled his part in God's plan, other characters emerged to shape this narrative. And the next chapter brings someone very familiar with the Persian court, a figure of courage and strategy, Queen Esther. Among the most fascinating figures in the Bible, Esther stands out as a symbol of courage and strategic intelligence. A young Jewish woman who, when chosen as Queen of Persia, faces a monumental decision: to save her people from imminent destruction. Her story isn't just a tale of bravery, it's a lesson in leadership and determination. Imagine the situation: a queen in a foreign court where a single word or wrong action could cost her life. Yet she chooses to risk everything to protect her people. Her story became an annual celebration, Purim, and is still remembered today as an example of how a single person can make all the difference in critical moments. When faced with the decree to exterminate the Jewish people, Esther didn't act alone. First, she turned to fasting and prayer, uniting her people in a spiritual movement before any physical action. This detail is important because it shows that, often, our greatest battles begin within ourselves. Esther understood that, to face such a challenging situation, she would need more than political strategies. She would need a spiritual strength to guide her. And perhaps this makes us think about how we handle our own battles. Before making an important decision, have you ever tried a moment of introspection, of seeking clarity and inner strength? Her courage in approaching the king without being summoned, an act that, at the time, could have resulted in her execution, reveals the depth of her faith and determination. Esther teaches us that sometimes we must take risks and trust in the greater purpose behind our actions. In daily situations, we can see this type of attitude as an inspiration. Perhaps it's that difficult decision to change careers or the risk of starting a new project that no one believes in but that you feel is necessary. Esther shows us that it's possible to overcome fear when we're willing to fight for what's right. There's also the practical side of Esther's plan, which wasn't driven only by faith but also by intelligence. She organized a banquet to prepare the king for her request to protect her people, demonstrating her skill in knowing the right time and way to act. Instead of direct confrontation, Esther adopted a careful approach, a clear example that strategy is as important as courage. It's like she'd read a manual on diplomacy and negotiation. How many times in our lives could we learn to wait for the right moment, to plan before acting, to turn a tense situation into an opportunity for victory? With her influence, Esther not only saved the Jewish people but also reinforced the idea that Persians could be allies, instruments of protection in Israel's history. Thus, the Queen's story goes beyond a simple act of bravery. It's a lesson on how divine intervention can appear in unexpected circumstances and people. And following this thread of alliances between Persians and Jews, we come to understand that empires also have their role, sometimes even prophetic. The Book of Daniel offers an intriguing view of the Persian Empire, a true turning point in the panorama of biblical prophecies. Imagine a prophet who, still in captivity, has visions of the rise and fall of empires, including Persia, a symbol of strength and a higher purpose. In the famous vision of the statue, the silver that represents Persia and Media shows us that this empire would have a role not just political but profoundly prophetic. For those seeking to understand the times and seasons mentioned in the Bible, this prophecy is like a roadmap, revealing that even the most powerful realms, like Persia, are subordinate to the divine plan, each with a specific moment to shine and fulfill its role. Persia, described as one of the horns in the vision of the ram and the goat, symbolizes the rise of a force that would impact other nations and pave the way for the next stage of divine plans. This image is powerful, and Daniel uses it to remind us that Persia's influence was more than military dominance. In a sense, we can even see Persia as a tool to clear the ground and prepare the scene for future events. Think about how, in our lives, some challenges or changes also serve to reorganize and push us forward, even though it may seem like a conflict at the time. These prophecies are not just accounts of the past. They inspire reflection on the nature of power and control. The Persian Empire was vast, but in Daniel's vision, it was under the dominion of higher forces, indicating that even the greatest empires, with all their glory, can be instruments in a larger narrative. This narrative makes us think about how every detail in our lives can be part of a hidden purpose. When we face situations where control seems to be in others' hands, maybe we can see the Persian example, understanding that, even without realizing it, we're part of something bigger. This Persian role in prophecy also illustrates how God uses nations and rulers to carry out his will. The Persian Empire may seem distant, but it influences our understanding of fulfilling divine promises. We might see Persia as the emblem of a profound truth, that earthly power is temporary and that there is a higher authority that puts everything in perspective. For the people of Israel, this vision brought hope and confidence that, even in times of exile, God's plan remained firm and that the prophecies would be fulfilled. With all this, the details of these prophecies end up serving as reminders for us. What today presents itself as an unshakable force may be only a temporary part of a larger plot. Persia, by playing its role, opens the way for the next phase, a new cycle of events that connects directly with the preparation for the end times. And here we see the beginning of a connection with the idea of end times, where Iran's influence, as the successor of ancient Persia, assumes an even more intense strategic role. When diving into biblical prophecies about the end times, Iran's role, the heir of ancient Persia, becomes one of the most enigmatic and fascinating elements. Prophecies in Ezekiel and Daniel indicate the presence of a coalition of nations that will unite against Israel, with Iran appearing as a prominent force. Imagine this, an ancient nation, with deep roots in Israel's history, being prophetically positioned to influence the events of the last days. This connection is more than intriguing. It's a powerful reminder that the modern geopolitical landscape may be moving towards fulfilling what was foretold thousands of years ago. In the famous prophecy about the Battle of Gog and Magog, Ezekiel mentions an alliance of nations that includes Persia. This battle is described as a monumental event where forces confront each other in a struggle that will impact humanity's future. This vision arouses curiosity and questions, especially in the context of current relations between Iran and Israel. For those who follow modern political tensions, the prophecy sounds almost like a forecast of what we see in today's headlines, creating a sense of urgency and mystery. And for those who enjoy understanding what lies between the lines, this prophecy is like a map full of symbols, suggesting a scenario where alliances and enemies are far from random. Of course, when speaking of the end times, many people are cautious, but it's essential to see these prophecies as a form of preparation, not panic. For those observing the patterns of how history unfolds, Iran seems to fulfill a role that transcends the political. It's a role that aligns with a larger narrative, where each step brings us closer to a climax awaited by generations. And for those seeking practical inspiration, perhaps this idea teaches us something about how we should view our own challenges. If even nations are guided by higher purposes, imagine what this means for each of us in our daily lives. Even though many of these prophecies are shrouded in mystery, it's fascinating to think about how Iran continues to be an influential player on the global stage. Today, with its political and religious tensions with Israel and the West, Iran seems to fit into the molds of these ancient predictions. It's as if the pieces are slowly aligning in a prophetic chess game where each move carries weight. History and faith tell us that time will reveal the truth behind each prophecy, and Iran, with its rich heritage and strategic role, remains a central piece on this board. Ezekiel's vision, combined with Daniel's revelations, points to an end where nothing is random. Even the most unexpected alliances, like the one that includes Iran, seem programmed to fulfill a specific purpose. And here arises the big question: if everything is indeed following a plan, what part do we play? After all, these end times prophecies, though grand, always carry a message for those paying attention. And that message seems to call us to look beyond what is immediate, to see the whole picture. Persia's story in the Bible gives us a unique perspective on how God uses nations and rulers to fulfill his purposes, even when they may not understand their role. Persia, or Iran, is a striking example of this, especially with figures like Cyrus the Great, who were directly used to benefit Israel and fulfill prophecies. Imagine the paradox. A pagan king, far from sharing Israel's faith, is called anointed by Isaiah and acts as a liberator for the Jewish people. It's as if, without knowing, Cyrus was following a script already written, where every decision he made was part of a greater plan. And it makes us wonder, how many times in our lives do we find help from where we least expect it? This idea of God using even powerful kingdoms to accomplish his plans is not only fascinating, it's a reminder that divine power transcends any human system. Persia was not a small or insignificant nation. On the contrary, it dominated vast lands and cultures. Yet, it was used to steer Israel's story, as a tool in God's hands. For those who seek to see the divine hand in all events, Persian history represents a profound lesson in faith and patience. After all, if even great empires are moved to fulfill a higher purpose, what does this say about the events in our own lives? The role of the Persians as instruments of God also teaches us about the importance of cross-cultural collaboration. In the Bible, the Persians interact with the Israelites differently from other empires, respecting their religion and encouraging their rebuilding. This act of tolerance is a model for today, especially in a world where differences are often seen as threats. Imagine what it would be like if we adopted this attitude in our communities, respecting and even helping those with beliefs and customs different from our own. Persia, with its openness and respect for the Jewish people, leaves us with a lesson that still echoes. As we reflect on these lessons, we encounter the enduring legacy of the Persian Empire. Even after its fall, the actions of the Persians continue to impact nations and, most importantly, the destiny of Israel. The rebuilding of the Temple in Jerusalem, the liberation of exiles, and the restoration of Israel's identity remain as historical and spiritual pillars. This durability leads us to believe that when something is part of a divine purpose, its influence endures, whether through people, nations, or even ideas. On a personal scale, this reminds us that actions done with true purpose are the ones that leave the deepest marks. Finally, when we look at modern Iran, the heir of this ancient empire, and its role in end-times prophecies, it's impossible not to wonder. Is Persia still playing a prophetic role, just as it did in antiquity? This is one of the mysteries that continue to surround this nation and its place in the biblical narrative. And perhaps, as we observe this continuity, we can see that each of us also has a role in a greater story, waiting to be fulfilled at the right time. We've reached the end of this journey through history, but what truly matters is how these insights can transform your worldview. How about looking at your life with the same intensity we explored Iran's role and biblical prophecies? Is there a purpose in every detail? Think about it. If even ancient empires were used for a greater good, could it be that each of us also has a mission waiting to be revealed? And now, tell me, what will you do with all this knowledge? Are you ready to dive even deeper? If so, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue this epic journey through the Bible and its mysteries. The next chapter may be exactly what you need to understand the greatest secrets of history. Shall we explore it together?